Hello and welcome to A Style of Law. My name's Steve Sitkin. I'm a partner at Fox Williams. And it's my pleasure to lead the fashion law group here at Fox Williams. With me on this inaugural podcast is my colleague Ash Kamyab. And Ash is going to be informing me about various issues when it comes to imitation websites and what is called domain squatting. Welcome, Ash.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be joining you.
Ash, let's talk about fashion brands and their online presence and how that can be turned against them by imitation websites and domains. Can you tell us about how bad actors exploit a brand's digital footprint and how widespread has the problem actually become?
I think that one of the biggest mistakes a brand can make in 2026 is believing that scam or imitation websites simply won't happen to them. What we've seen from the WIPO figures of 2025 is over 6,000 domain name disputes. For context, this is over double the figure from 2015. And why should fashion brands in particular be concerned about this? There was another report in collaboration between the EU IPO and the OECD, and these figures were from 2021, however they were reported in 2025. But clothing, footwear and leather goods account for 62% of seized counterfeit goods globally. Fashion is by far the most targeted sector of counterfeit goods. Now, how do these bad actors actually do it? There's several ways to do it. They can copy layouts, imitate language, register domains that look plausible enough to deceive customers. And the problem that we're now facing is this is not a high level scam. This is not difficult for the bad actors to do. And the reason for that is that AI has dramatically lowered the barrier for creating such convincing fake sites. Registering a domain is inexpensive, and asking ChatGPT to write you or to copy another website is also not difficult. Fashion brands really rely on their online presence, and for a lot of them, their online store is the most important shopfront they have. So when the bad actors have access to important marketing materials, product photos, advertising campaigns, it makes it an easy target for them to copy.
Okay, thanks for that. And I think that helps us set the scene. But I've been reading about something called domain squatting, which, if I've understood what I've read correctly, is a primary method used by bad actors. But what does domain squatting actually involve?
Well, you're absolutely right, Steve. And domain squatting is also commonly known as cyber squatting. And the way the bad actor achieves a potential scam, whether that's phishing sensitive customer information or simply receiving payment for counterfeit or lower quality goods, or even not making the delivery of any goods and simply stealing the money. The way that they do that through domain squatting is registering a confusingly similar domain to exploit an established brand. So what does that do? It means that they can divert traffic that was originally intended for that brand. Once you actually land on their page, the imagery you'll see, whether that's language, photographs, or even legal disclaimers, will strongly impersonate the brand. One other slight interesting niche you get from domain squatting is sometimes they will actually register the domain to sell it back to the brand at an inflated price because they know how valuable these domains are for fashion brands. Now, one way that is very common for consumers to be deceived is what's called typosquatting. These are domains which are one letter away, generally, from an established brand's domain. This means that it's easy to miss these changes for consumers. Another method is to use a different domain suffix. So if your brand domain is brandname.com, they will register brandname.outlook.shop, etc. And in 2026 particularly, the popularization of what we call generic top-level domains, such as .outlet and .shop, has made policing this issue a lot harder for brands. Earlier, I touched on the fact that some bad actors will try and sell similar domains back to the fashion brand. There's one other opportunistic angle that they can adopt, and that's the registration of legitimate brand domains when a brand's registration lapses. So that's just yet another issue that brands have to keep their eye on when it comes to their domains and online presence.
Thanks for that. And Ash, from what you said, it seems to me that domain squatting, the way it operates, is quite comparable to trademark piracy, where we will encounter bad actors registering trademarks or very similar trademarks to a brand, and then either waiting for the brand to come along and try and do something about it and perhaps be willing to vacate the registration that they have for a small fee, or whether they manage to secure registration to sell the registration of the actual trademark to the brand. And so I can see an easy comparable when it comes to domain squatting and the way it works. But I'm aware that there's also something called imitation scam websites. And I'm struggling to see the comparables so far as trademarks are concerned. So tell us, how do imitation scam websites actually work?
Just to be clear for fashion brands, some domain squatters may also be using an imitation scam website, but the issue is actually a distinct threat. Now, we just discussed domain squatting, where a similar domain is used. However, these imitation scam websites sometimes use completely irrelevant domains, but the way that they hook consumers is replicating the genuine brand's website almost in its entirety. Layouts, product photography, typography, color schemes, you name it, particularly contact details or addresses that consumers associate with the official brand are directly copied across. Therefore, for a consumer who's not paying particularly close attention because the site feels and looks so legitimate, for example, a consumer who's trying to shop on their phone, they will not be able to tell the difference. As I said, the hook is often the similarity, but that's not all. Nearly always, these imitation websites say brand name clearance sales, outlet pricing, limited time offers, buy now. All these hooks apply pressure to the consumer who feels I'm on a legitimate website or an equivalent official Outlook website for the fashion brand and makes them feel I have to make this purchase now. And if they do that, their payment details, address, monies are received by these bad actors, and there's really no way of getting it back once the cat is out of the bag. Now, we've actually seen a very interesting example lately where we had what was in a lot of ways an imitation website, but they were using almost sub-brands. So each sub-brand had its own imitation website under the same domain. And what they did is they would also steal the imagery and plaster it amongst their own social media using stolen imagery, product names, etc., etc., even videos of this fashion brand's CEO. So these infringing sites can actually become part of a multi-channel strategy for bad actors to not only divert traffic, but to trick consumers into thinking they're receiving authentic goods or that they will even receive goods at all.
And we talk about multi-channels with regards to legitimate brands, legitimate businesses. I think that's the first time I've heard reference to multi-channels by being used by bad actors, but there you go. Okay, so we can see risk to the consumer, considerable risk to the consumer. We can see that brands, legitimate brands, are going to lose sales by what these bad actors get up to. But tell me, do you think there's a deeper commercial and reputational issue or damage that can impact brands? Do you think that the fashion as a particular trade sector is particularly exposed?
I would say absolutely. And the reason for that is if you take a step back, this whole issue arises because of customer confusion. They believe that this infringing scam website that they're buying from is the official brand. And if that myth or incorrect perception of the situation is not corrected, they will still blame the brand for either stealing their money, providing a poor quality alternative to their product. They could even leave negative reviews if they don't know that they are dealing with a scam. Not only that, but if you are a customer who's been defrauded and then potentially become aware of that, you may either one, associate the brand with the fraud and think that the fashion brand is acting in concert with these bad actors, or simply be furious that you've been allowed to be defrauded, look for someone to blame, and naturally, who's the easiest target? The fashion brand themselves. So when fashion brands, particularly if they're aware of fake sites, if a customer has written to a support line and said, look, I've been scammed here, if these issues are not rectified quickly, it can fast become a reputational problem. And why fashion? Why is fashion particularly exposed? I think every fashion brand knows that their success is built on trust, repeat business, and loyalty. So when a brand's own visual identity becomes the weapon used against it, that can be damage which is hard to rectify in the short term and the long term.
Okay, I get that. So we've identified the problem. Let's look at cure. What can brands actually do about these various issues? And also, how do you usually approach the actions which brands can take when talking with clients?
Well, this is good hygiene for any fashion brand, but it's particularly important with regards to these infringing sites, and that's to ensure that your trademark portfolio is in order. That includes registering relevant marks in the correct jurisdictions for the correct goods and services. And the reason that's so important here is that one of the first ports of calls for removing these infringing sites is what's called a takedown. And one of the easiest ways to evidence that a site is infringing is to show that it is using a registered trademark. It's important to remember that registered rights, particularly in the UK, are the strongest rights to demonstrate have been infringed. Now, in terms of how brands should be approaching the situation, we've talked about the harm the confusion and misleading bad actors can cause. Once that damage is done, it is done. So proactive monitoring is absolutely essential. You need to be ahead of the game, regularly scanning for infringing domains and content. And that's something that we now offer our clients because it is not an easy process. However, the easier that these threats are identified, the less damage it does. Waiting for that instance of customer confusion or the complaint is generally too late because that relationship and belief with that customer and potentially others, if they've left a bad review or word of mouth, has already been eroded. Now, I mentioned a few moments ago takedowns, and to whom, you may ask? And that's to registrars and hosting providers. So those who set up and maintain the site, even if they do not have control over the contents. This is a very quick process generally and also quite cost effective. However, it's largely dependent on who the registrar or hosting provider is. A lot of them are from foreign jurisdictions in which it's harder to enforce UK intellectual property rights without a court judgment. However, what we're finding is generally we are able to make an effective takedown with at least one of the parties I've just mentioned. A lot of people might say, I'm being effectively defrauded by this bad actor. I want to go straight to them. I want to write them a cease and desist letter or to tell them that they must stop immediately. But the reality is, it's not that easy. These bad actors scrub the site clean and any registrant data so that you can't identify them. That's why we have to go to registrars and hosting providers who are publicly known and we have access to. But that's not all. Sometimes there's only so far you can get talking to a registrar or hosting provider. Fortunately, the World Intellectual Property Organization offer what's called the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy, also known as a UDRP. When you submit a UDRP complaint, it is a fairly expensive procedure. However, the result is either the cancellation or the transfer to the fashion brand of the domain. So, in the examples we gave earlier, if it's a domain which uses a different suffix .shop, which the fashion brand is still interested in, they can actually take ownership and use the domain. So not only do you prevent future harm, but you actually get a benefit in kind. There's also a newer process called the Uniform Rapid Suspension System, and this is a very quick resolution system, which again is more common for escalated procedures. And the only detriment to that compared to the UDRP is you do not actually get the domain transferred to you. It is simply suspended. For the UDRPs, you might be wondering, what do we actually have to prove? To be honest, it's relatively simple, particularly in these cases when you have a registered trademark, where you would only actually need to prove that the domain is confusingly similar to the trademark, the owner of that domain has no legitimate interest in it, and it was registered in bad faith. Now, if we're talking about scam imitation websites which also use that similar domain, these are almost tick boxes which can easily be demonstrated as long as you have your rights and evidence in order.
Okay. So, Ash, to conclude, can you run us through what you think fashion brands should be doing right now to stay ahead of all of these issues? And how should they be thinking about managing domain squatting as an ongoing risk?
I'd say that's exactly it, Steve. It's an ongoing operational risk. It cannot be a reactive exercise where you're waiting for the damage to be done. Proactive monitoring is absolutely essential. And if you do identify or have flagged to you an infringing website, you should promptly seek legal advice to ensure that the damage to the brand is minimized. When you do get an example of customer confusion, either by a report through your complaints channels or otherwise, it's important to take it both seriously and to respond directly to that customer. That ensures that your reputation is kept intact, not only for that customer's relationship with you, but any others that he may, for example, publish reviews for, or simply, as I say, discuss the matter with. If you notice that this is a really severe issue and it's happening a lot and you really can't escape these bad actors, then we would generally recommend some sort of consumer facing guidance, either on your social media or official website, so that customers can report suspected fakes directly to you, but also hopefully fall for these scam sites a little bit less. And as I said, all of this starts with a trademark portfolio that is in order.
Ash, thank you very much indeed for those thoughts. And I'll conclude by offering one further thought. As with the case of a burglar alarm, really you're using a burglar alarm to deter the burglar from burgling your house. By doing the actions that Ash has mentioned, by taking time to sort things out so far as your trademark portfolio is concerned, if anything, you're persuading the would-be bad actor to go and be a bad actor with somebody else's brand. Just a thought. Thank you very much for listening to A Style of Law. And for further information, please visit our website, foxwilliams.com, or go to fashionlaw.co.uk. Thank you.